Greetings, Boogie fans! Michael here, and Gigantamax Pokemon are really elusive, so when you're finally able to catch one, it's really cool. However, in today's video, I will be discussing why, in some cases, you actually really don't want a Gigantamax Pokemon. While Gigantamax Pokemon look very different from their Dynamaxed counterparts, they are actually very similar in regards to battle impact. The only difference between a Gigantamax Pokemon and a Dynamaxed Pokemon of the same species is the exclusive G-Max move, which for that Pokemon replaces all of its max moves of a certain type. G-Max moves and max moves are identical in regards to attacking power. What differs between them is the move's secondary effect, because all max and all G-Max moves have a secondary effect besides just causing initial damage. Gigantamax Pokemon are rare and elusive, so because they're harder to find, one might think that Gigantamax Pokemon would, across the board, be better than their Dynamax counterparts. However, as I've been playing through Sword and Shield, I realized that that's not the case for everything, and there are definitely some G-Max moves that are strictly inferior to their max move counterparts. I thought it'd be fun to go through every single G-Max move and compare it to its associated max move to determine whether that G-Max move is better on that particular species of Pokemon, or if the regular max move is better and therefore the regular Dynamax Pokemon is better. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel because I want to hit 1 million subs soon, yay, and let's dive into figuring out which are the Gigantamax Pokemon that you don't want. First, we'll talk about Gigantamax Charizard. All of its Fire-type moves turn into G-Max Wildfire, which has a secondary effect of causing additional damage for 4 turns to any non-Fire-type Pokemon hit by it. This replaces the Fire-type max move Max Flare, which causes intense sunlight to be set up. I personally believe Max Flare is superior to G-Max Wildfire because having sunlight set up is super beneficial to Charizard. It gives a 50% power boost to all of its Fire-type attacks, it halves the damage it's going to take from super effective Water-type moves, if it has its hidden ability Solar Power, that's going to boost its special attack even more, and it makes it so it can use Solar Beam in only 1 turn against potentially threatening water or rock type opponents. Meanwhile, G-Max Wildfire just does some extra damage to one Pokemon, a Pokemon that's already gonna take massive damage from a max move anyways. Plus, if you knock out the enemy Pokemon in 1 hit, G-Max Wildfire effectively has no secondary effect, whereas Max Flare sets up sunlight that will benefit your Charizard when fighting the subsequent Pokemon that your opponent sends out. So in my opinion, Gigantamax Charizard is strictly inferior to a regular Dynamaxing Charizard. In regards to battle prowess, because Gigantamax Charizard does look really freaking cool. The next Gigantamax form is Gigantamax Butterfree. Its bug-type attacks become G-Max Befuddle, which does damage to one opponent but inflicts sleep, poison, or paralysis on all opposing Pokemon that are on the field. If the Butterfree cannot Gigantamax, its regular bug-type max move is Max Flutterby, which lowers the enemy Pokemon's special attack by 1 stage. I think Befuddle is superior to Flutterby, and therefore Gigantamax Butterfree is superior, because Befuddle works on all opponents. You can give a status condition to anything that the opponent sends in. However, Flutterby lowering special attack is only beneficial if the opposing Pokemon is a special attacker. If it's a physical attacker, who cares if it has its special attack lowered? Therefore, since Befuddle is good against anything, and Flutterby is only good against some, I think Befuddle and therefore Gigantamax Butterfree are better. Next up is Gigantamax Pikachu, whose electric type moves turn into G-Max Volt Crash, which, like Befuddle, damages one opponent but paralyzes all opponents even if they're ground type. The regular electric max move is Max Lightning, which does damage and summons electric terrain that lasts for 5 turns. This is the first of several in this video that I think is a toss-up. G-Max Volt Crash seems like it's pretty good. Being able to paralyze all of your opponents is really helpful, especially if they're super fast and you need to cripple their speed so you can outspeed them. However, having electric terrain set up is really nice as well, because that's going to give a 50% power boost to all of your electric type attacks for subsequent turns after you use it the first time. That's really nice and can't be ignored. I think it's a toss-up because which one is better depends on the situation. I think Volt Crash is better against either really fast opponents or Pokemon that are going to survive your initial hit, because then you can cripple them with paralysis for subsequent turns. I think Max Lightning is better if the Pokemon is probably going to be OHKO'd by your attack, because then you have electric terrain set up that you can use to power up your subsequent moves. Whereas if you Volt Crash them and OHKO them, then the paralysis does nothing because they're dead. The next Gigantamax Pokemon is Gigantamax Meowth, whose normal type moves become G-Max Gold Rush. This attack confuses opponents and also scatters coins, which will give you extra prize money after a battle in which you would normally gain prize money. If the Meowth cannot Gigantamax, its normal type moves become Max Strike, which lowers the target's speed by 1 stage. For me, this is another toss-up. I think Gold Rush is superior for in-game playthrough situations because, well, the extra money's nice. However, if you're fighting against a real person, then the prize money aspect of it doesn't matter, only the confusion aspect. And confusion is nice, but it's definitely inferior to other status conditions because, for one, it's temporary, but also there's no guaranteed effect. Burn will for sure damage them and cut their attack. Paralysis will for sure cut their speed and might make them not able to move. Confusion might make them not able to move, but it also might allow them to attack every time, so there's that. As for Max Strike lowering their speed, that is certainly helpful. It's nice to slow enemy Pokemon down so it makes it so you're more likely to outspeed. However, that doesn't really help if either you're already faster or they are so much faster that they would require several speed drops to ever be slower than you. In the end, I think both of these moves are somewhat underwhelming, but they're kind of equally underwhelming, so I can't really pick one, and I think it's a toss-up, assuming you're fighting a real person. If it's a playthrough, use Gigantamax Meowth because the extra money will be cool. Before I move on to the next entry, just a friendly reminder that if you're watching this video on the day it came out, today is the last day for my MandJTV merch store Cyber Weekend sale where several limited designs have made a return, and you can get 10% off with the discount code GRAPPLELOCKED. This Battle Department shirt is back, the For Safety Porpoises shirts are back. Make sure you pick those up if you want them today, link in the description. Next we have Gigantamax Machamp, whose fighting type moves become G-Max Chi Strike, which boosts its critical hit ratio as if it was using focus energy. Normally its fighting type moves would become Max Knuckle, which raises the user's physical attack by 1 stage. Gigantamax Machamp is flat out worse than regular Machamp. Yes, boosting your critical hit ratio is nice because then you have a chance to do 1.5 times the damage that you normally would. But if you use Max Knuckle and boost your attack by 1 stage, you're guaranteed to do 1.5 times damage compared to what you normally would. It's like a guaranteed critical hit every time versus, oh, you might get a critical hit. Yes, critical hits can break through an enemy's defense boosts and a normal boosted attack would not do that, but that's a situational thing that's only sometimes going to come into play. It is much better to guarantee an attack boost that works against all enemy Pokemon compared to just maybe getting more crits. Do not use Gigantamax Machamp in serious competitive play. But if you're just kind of messing around, then go for it because it looks cool. Next up is Gigantamax Gengar. Its ghost type moves become G-Max Terror, which in addition to doing damage, traps the opposing Pokemon in battle, much like the effect of Mean Look. If it's not Gigantamax Gengar, its ghost type moves are Max Phantasm, which lowers the enemy Pokemon's defense by 1 stage. This is an easy one. Gigantamax Gengar is clearly superior to regular Dynamax Gengar. Being able to trap the enemy Pokemon is a huge deal, because it can be a death sentence for a Pokemon that matches up really poorly against Gengar and would normally just switch out and wait till the Gengar is dealt with. If it's stuck in there, then the Gengar can handle it and finish it. But Max Phantasm just lowers the target's defense stat. Now, if it's a physical Max Phantasm, then that's pretty nice, but Gengar is a special attacker. Lowering the target's physical defense stat doesn't help it at all. So it's very obviously G-Max Terror and therefore Gigantamax Gengar that are the better option here. After that is Gigantamax Lapras, whose Ice-type moves become G-Max Resonance, which reduces the damage Lapras takes for 5 turns. It's basically Aurora Veil, but Hail does not have to be active for it to work. Speaking of Hail, a regular Lapras's Ice-type moves become Max Hailstorm, which, as the name implies, sets up hail that lasts for 5 turns. Deciding between these two wasn't as easy as it was for Gengar, but I think I have to give the edge to Gigantamax Lapras here. Resonance effectively doubles its defense and special defense for 5 entire turns, which is awesome, especially since Lapras's main role is usually to be tanky, so it just becomes a better tank. Having the Hail setup is also definitely nice because you'll damage enemy Pokemon since they're probably unlikely to be Ice types, and it would make Lapras's Blizzard 100% accurate if you're running that. However, those benefits definitely are outweighed by the huge benefit of taking half damage for 5 turns. That is really good. Next is Gigantamax Eevee, whose normal type moves become G-Max Cuddle, which will infatuate any opposite gender Pokemon hit by the move, so just like Attract. If you recall from the Meowth discussion, the alternate is Max Strike, which lowers the target speed by 1 stage. I personally think Gigantamax Eevee is inferior here because you can't infatuate all opponents. If you are able to, don't get me wrong, it's really nice, but it doesn't work on genderless Pokemon or Pokemon of the same gender, which are proportionately more than half of all Pokemon. To me, it makes more sense to go for the move that's going to have an impact on all enemy Pokemon rather than just some of them. So to me, it makes sense to just go for a regular Eevee here. Or an Eeveelution. Next up is Gigantamax Snorlax, whose normal type moves become G-Max Replenish, which restores a berry that it had previously eaten in battle. Of course, as I just said, if the Snorlax is regular, the normal moves are just Max Strike. Gigantamax Snorlax is vastly superior to regular Snorlax, in my opinion. In the Japanese reveal trailer for it, it shows the Snorlax using Belly Drum and getting to half health, and also maximizing its attack, then restoring some of that health with a Citrus Berry. Then it Gigantamaxes, uses Replenish, then gets the Citrus Berry back and heals again. Being able to get more than one use out of a berry and do damage while doing it is incredible, and Replenish is vastly superior to Strike because, yeah, a speed drop is nice, but this thing can heal with a Citrus Berry more than once. Gigantamax Garbodor is the next form whose poison-type moves become G-Max Malodor, which poisons enemy Pokemon. This contrasts to the regular poison-type max move, which is Max Ooze, which raises the user's and its allies' special attack by 1 stage. This is another situation similar to Gengar's, where the Gigantamax form is clearly superior because of the stat that the regular max move affects. Garbodor is a physical attacker, but Max Ooze boosts special attack. Therefore, that secondary effect is useless for it, and it's much better to just get a guaranteed poisoning on your opponent. Then we have Gigantamax Dreadnought, whose water-type moves become G-Max Stone Surge, which has a secondary effect of setting up stealth rocks on the enemy side of the field. This compares to the regular water-type max move of Max Geyser, which summons rain. I believe that regular Dynamax Dreadnought is better than Gigantamax Dreadnought. Now, don't get me wrong, Stone Surge is pretty freaking good. Being able to set up stealth rocks at the same time as doing damage is fantastic, because entry hazards are a big deal in competitive battling. So definitely don't dismiss Stone Surge as useless. However, having Rain set up is simply more beneficial for a Dreadnought. It boosts the power of its water-type moves by 50%. Plus, Dreadnought's hidden ability is Swift Swim, which as of now seems to be the most popular ability for it. Because 1 Max Geyser, and you've simultaneously boosted your water power by 50% and made yourself a hell of a lot faster. Like I said, the stealth rocks are nice, and maybe you can make an argument for Stone Surge being better on a non-Swift Swim Dreadnought. However, you're probably going to want to run a Swift Swim Dreadnought, and therefore, Max Geyser's better for it. Next up is Gigantamax Corviknight, whose flying type moves become G-Max Wind Rage, a move whose secondary effect is basically defog. It clears away entry hazards, screens, Aurora Veil, and similar type things on both sides of the field, in addition to getting rid of any terrain. And yes, Defog was buffed in Generation 8 to also get rid of terrains, which it did not do in previous generations. So yeah, Wind Rage really is damage plus Defog. Compare that to a regular Corviknight's flying type moves, which become Max Airstream, which boosts the user's speed by 1 stage. I think regular Corviknight is better than Gigantamax Corviknight. To me, Defog has always been an inferior Rapid Spin because you have to get rid of entry hazards on both sides of the field, when ideally you would rather get rid of the ones on your side and leave the ones on your opponent's side. Meanwhile, Max Airstream boosting your speed by 1 stage every time you attack is really nice. That sets up some amazing sweeping potential, and it's really beneficial for Corviknight since it's not super fast. I definitely think you are far better off with a regular Corviknight than a Gigantamax one. Next is Gigantamax Toxtricity, which as of writing this video is not available, but we have the data for its G-Max move, which is G-Max Stun Shock. It's what its electric type moves become, and it poisons or paralyzes opponents, much like Butterfree's G-Max Befuddle minus the sleep option. Normally it would be Max Lightning, which as I mentioned with Pikachu, sets up electric terrain. This situation is virtually identical to that of Pikachu, where you're choosing between giving a guaranteed status condition to a Pokemon or boosting the power of your subsequent electric type moves. I won't go into too much detail because I covered this debate in the Pikachu section, but this one's a toss-up for me because which one is better depends on the situation and your personal preference. Next up is Gigantamax Alcremie, whose fairy-type moves turn into G-Max Finale, which does damage and heals both Alcremie and its allies. For regular Alcremie, its fairy-type moves become Max Starfall, which sets up Misty Terrain. I personally think G-Max Finale and Gigantamax Alcremie are the better option here because setting up Misty Terrain doesn't really help that much. All of the other terrains, those being Electric, Grass, and Psychic, boost the power of their respective types' moves by 50%. But Misty Terrain doesn't do that. It halves the damage of Dragon-type moves, which is a type of move that don't work on a fairy-type Alcremie anyways. Therefore, since Alcremie will not be powering itself up with the Misty Terrain, the clearly better option is healing itself and also healing its allies if it's a double battle. That is never a bad thing, whereas Misty Terrain just doesn't help. Yes, it blocks status conditions, but that's situational. For me, I'm picking the tall cake every time. Next is Gigantamax Duraludon, whose Dragon-type moves become G-Max Depletion, which reduces the PP of the opposing Pokemon's last used move, much like the Ghost-type move Spite. The regular Dragon Max move is Max Whirlwind, which lowers the opponent's attack by 1 stage. I think Gigantamax Duraludon is the inferior form here, because most of the time, battles aren't lasting long enough for anyone to worry about their moves running out of PP. Yes, there are certain situations where it's very helpful, like if the opponent is choiced and it can't switch out so you force it to struggle, or if they use a low PP move like Close Combat and you cause that to run out, sure, those are great, but those are situational. I feel like lowering the physical attack of an enemy Pokemon is going to be more helpful more often, because while that doesn't help against special attackers, you're gonna run into physical attackers a lot more often than you're gonna run into situations where depletion is more helpful. Plus, Max Whirlwind is super effective on dragon types, and a lot of dragon types are physical attackers. I think regular Duraludon is just the better one here. Next is Gigantamax Orbeetle, whose psychic type moves become G-Max Gravitas, a move that does damage but also activates gravity. If you didn't know, gravity causes all moves' accuracies to be multiplied by 5/3, and it grounds any flying or levitating Pokemon. In contrast, the regular Psychic Max move is Max Mindstorm, which summons Psychic Terrain. Regular Orbeetle is vastly superior to Gigantamax Orbeetle because gravity doesn't help Orbeetle. Virtually all of the moves it would use are already 100% accurate, so it doesn't care about the accuracy boost very much. Plus, it's not a ground type. It's not like it's suddenly going to be able to Earthquake Pokemon that it wasn't able to before. It's a Bug and Psychic type, both of which are not impacted by flying or levitating Pokemon. Yes, the accuracy boost helps with Hypnosis, and if you pair it with a ground-type Pokemon in a double battle, then the gravity can be really nice. However, you have to build your team specifically for that to make sense. In most generally applicable situations, boosting your Psychic-type attack power with Psychic Terrain is gonna be better. Next is Gigantamax Colossal, whose rock-type moves become G-Max Volcalith. This attack causes damage each turn for 4 turns after the initial hit. The regular Rock Max move is Max Rockfall, which summons a Sandstorm. This is another Gigantamax form that I think is just simply not as good as the regular form. Yes, Volcalith keeps damaging the opponent after the initial hit, but so does a freaking Sandstorm! Okay, Rock, Ground, and Steel-type Pokemon would not continue to take damage from the Sandstorm, but like, you're not going to be using a Rock-type move on any of those types of Pokemon anyways. Additionally, Rock-type Pokemon have their special defense boosted by 50% under a Sandstorm, and that's a really nice defensive buff to a Colossal. I definitely think setting up the Sandstorm is just going to be better than doing a little bit of extra damage. Next up is Gigantamax Sandaconda, a Pokemon which, fun fact, I have never failed to catch somehow. Gigantamax Pokemon have very low catch rates. It's actually really annoying. But somehow I am 10 for 10 on Gigantamax Sandaconda. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. I would happily swap 7 of those for other Gigantamax forms I don't have. I don't want to do any more of them because I don't want to ruin my perfect record. Anyways, back on topic. Its ground-type moves become G-Max Sand Blast, which basically traps the opponent in Sand Tomb, trapping them and causing them damage for 4 to 5 turns. Conversely, the regular ground max move, Max Quake, raises the user's special defense by 1 stage. At first glance, I was leaning towards Sand Blast being the better move, because while it's not a permanent trapping a Pokemon for any amount of time is really nice. Plus, the extra damage, of course, is icing on the cake. However, then I discovered that Sandaconda's second worst stat is its special defense, and the only one that's worse is its special attack, which it's not gonna use anyways, so special defense is basically its worst stat. Therefore, that special defense boost can go a long way to bolstering its weaker defensive side, so I think for this one, it's gonna be a toss-up. Next is Gigantamax Grimmsnarl, hands down one of the most horrifying Pokemon ever created. Its Dark-type moves become G-Max Snooze, a move name which seems far too lighthearted for this Pokemon's design. It activates Yawn on the opponent, meaning it will fall asleep at the end of the following turn. Switching out can of course avoid this, but it is 100% accurate. Meanwhile, Max Darkness, the regular Dark-type max move, lowers the target's special defense by 1 stage. Gigantamax Grimmsnarl is superior here for the same reason that Gigantamax Gengar is superior. The regular max move lowers the wrong stat. Grimmsnarl is clearly a physical attacker, so lowering the target's special defense doesn't help it at all. Meanwhile, maybe forcing a switch due to the Yawn activation or actually putting them to sleep can definitely be pretty helpful. Next up is Gigantamax Flapple, whose grass-type moves become G-Max Tartness, which lowers the opposing Pokemon's evasion stat by 1 stage. Meanwhile, the typical grass-type max move is Max Overgrowth, which activates grassy terrain. This is the first Pokemon on this list where the better move depends on the specific instance of the Pokemon. Flapple's hidden ability is Hustle, which boosts the power of its physical attacks by 50%, but lowers their accuracy by 20%. Therefore, a G-Max move that lowers the opposing Pokemon's evasiveness synergizes really well with this. So, if your Flapple has Hustle, it's better if it can Gigantamax. However, if the Flapple has one of its regular abilities, those being Ripen or Gluttony, then Overgrowth is better, because lowering the evasiveness of the target really doesn't matter because the moves it's going to be using are already 100% accurate. So, if it has Hustle, go with the Gigantamax form. If it does not have Hustle, then the regular one is better. Next is Gigantamax Appleton, which looks identical to Flapple, but is different. Rather than G-Max Tartness, its G-Max move is G-Max Sweetness, which heals all status conditions of all allies. Of course, the other option is Max Overgrowth, which I just described. I tend to lean more toward regular Appleton here. Being able to heal your status conditions is for sure nice, but it's only helpful if you have any. Meanwhile, summoning grassy terrain and giving a 50% boost to all of your grass-type attacks, no matter whether you have a status condition or not, seems like it would be more generally applicable. So, I think regular Appleton is better than the Gigantamax one. After that is Gigantamax Hatterene, whose fairy-type moves become G-Max Smite, which confuses opposing Pokemon. As I mentioned earlier in the video with Alcremie, the regular fairy max move is Max Starfall, which summons Misty Terrain. Gigantamax Hatterene is the superior one for the same reason that Gigantamax Alcremie was superior, because Misty Terrain doesn't really help it. all Misty Terrain does is harm a type that already cannot harm Fairy-type Pokemon. Therefore, it makes more sense to just go with the move that'll confuse the target, which is nice, you know? Misty Terrain, yeah, it can block status conditions, but I would rather for sure confuse an enemy rather than protect myself from status conditions that the enemy may or may not want to put on me. Next is Gigantamax Caparaja, whose Steel-type moves become G-Max Steel Surge, which places Steel-type Stealth Rocks on the enemy side of the field. The regular Steel-type max move is Max Steel Spike, which raises the user's defense. I personally think that Gigantamax Caparaja is superior for two reasons. The first is that it's already a pretty bulky Pokemon. Yes, its defense stats aren't very high, but its HP stat is excellent. So, while the defense boost is nice, it's not really helping a really bad stat, because Caparaja is already decently bulky. The second reason is that the Steel-type Stealth Rocks are super unique. Gigantamax Caparaja is the only Pokemon that can summon them, so there's no way that your opponent is going to prepare for them. If you're able to get those up on their side of the field, that can really throw them for a loop. And I just think that's fun. So go with Gigantamax Caparaja if you can. Next up is another Gigantamax Steel-type Pokemon, which, like Toxtricity, is not currently available, but we do have the data for. That Gigantamax form is Melmetal. Its Steel-type moves become G-Max Meltdown, which basically activates Torment against the opposing Pokemon, preventing them from using the same move twice in a row. This is definitely inferior to Max Steel Spike. Raising the user's defense is nice. Melmetal doesn't need it very much because it already has incredible defense, but it needs to torment the enemy Pokemon even less. Sure, it can cripple a choiced Pokemon, but that's basically it. It's pretty easy to get around not being able to use the same move twice in a row. It's why you don't really see Torment in competitive play much at all. Therefore, Meltdown's secondary effect is mostly useless, whereas Steel Spike's is not. Next is Gigantamax Kingler, whose water-type moves become G-Max Foam Burst, which harshly lowers the speed of the Pokemon hit by it, so cutting it in half if their speed has not previously been affected. Meanwhile, water moves become Max Geyser, which, as you should remember, summons rain. Unlike Dreadnought, I think the Gigantamax form is better for this water type. It'd be a different story if Kingler got Swift Swim or some other ability that was impacted by the rain, but it doesn't. Therefore, the rain only gives it one benefit, which is the 50% power boost to its water type attacks, unlike two benefits for Dreadnought. Harshly lowering the enemy's speed is really nice though. Picture this, your Kingler's matched up against another Pokemon that outspeeds it. The other Pokemon hits first, then your Kingler hits back with a Foam Burst, harshly lowering the enemy Pokemon's speed. Because of that, now your Kingler is faster and it can hit a second time without taking any more damage. Sure, it would be better if it sharply raised Kingler's speed instead of harshly lowering the enemy Pokemon, but that'd probably be kinda broken, and being able to instantly outspeed almost anything after just one attack is really nice. Foam Burst, definitely better, so Gigantamax Kingler, definitely better. And the final Gigantamax form is Gigantamax Centiskorch, whose fire-type moves become G-Max Centiferno. This basically activates Fire Spin on the target, hurting them each turn for 4 to 5 turns and also trapping them in battle during that time. The other option is, of course, Max Flare, which sets up Sunlight. This last one is a toss-up. Trapping the enemy Pokemon for several turns is really nice, and you do damage in addition to that, but it's also really nice to set up Sun and boost your firepower and nerf enemy water-type attacks to make them no longer super effective. I think both of these effects are really good, so I guess which one is better is kinda up to personal preference. So that officially covers all of the exclusive G-Max moves of the Gigantamax Pokemon. So to summarize, the Gigantamax forms that you don't want, because I think they're worse than their regular Dynamax forms, are Charizard, Machamp, Eevee, Dreadnought, Corviknight, Duraludon, Orbeetle, Colossal, Flapple without Hustle, and Appleton. Definitely add these to your collection, but maybe don't worry about the competitive one that you're building being able to Gigantamax, because it's better if it's just regular. Thank you so much for watching, and an extra special thanks to my patrons on Patreon. If you want to help support me and support the channel and give me a revenue stream independent of the fluctuating YouTube ad revenue, the link is in the description below. Also, don't forget to check out the merch sale. Make sure you do that. Click somewhere on the screen. And also, if you want to check out my Pokemon Sword Let's Play on my second channel, hit that button right there. All right, that's all I have for now. So until next time, Poke fans, gotta catch them all.